we will have Tuğba, Zeynep, Shen, PhD student at University of Southern California, and Engin, Onuk, PhD student at Istanbul Bilgi University. Their presentation is entitled Vernacular Discourses of Transnational Online Misogyny, Studying Turkish Incels.
Hi everyone. Let me share my screen. Okay. So hi, nice to be here. So just a disclaimer, this is an ongoing project that we are coordinating with Tuğba, my dear friend and colleague. So it's in the very early stages. So yeah, I'll just get right into it. Okay. Okay, so yes, our subject matter is incels. So yeah, why are we kind of studying this fringe group and its Turkish incarnation? There are a few fundamental reasons. Yeah, so as we know, online communities have become fundamental forms of organization for political, social, and in this case, gender socialization. So they aren't just floating in digital space, they form distinct identities, they have real world consequences. In fact, yeah, multiple acts of violence and murders are attributed to this group, to incels. And also discontent, yeah, so the existence of such fringe communities as incels represent a general discontent with the expectations of mainstream contemporary culture. So yes, it gives way to a form of like an extreme interpretation of, and then a misogynistic version of reality, let's say. And yeah, also insular communities. So these digital platforms, forums, social networks, they enable the formation of insular communities with their own distinct identities. So yeah, and they have been using some like language, distinct language that may seem very alien to outsiders, like researchers. So yeah, we're basically going to talk about the difficulties of the language being used in Turkish incels and their implications for researchers mostly. Yeah, just to give a brief background for those who may be unfamiliar, the incels are involuntary celibates. They're mostly young men, right? And they're disillusioned with their inability to form romantic or sexual relationships with women, and their perceived grievances about contemporary culture's expectation of them. Yeah, they're actually a smaller part of a larger group. So this is called the manosphere. Manosphere is a large network of online men's communities who are mostly mobilized around anti-feminist, sexist beliefs. They include a couple of groups, and that includes also incels. So just two terms that are associated with incels, the most used terms they use, so red pill and black pill. Yeah, so they think in their minds, contrary to the general belief, they think that, yeah, red pill, they're taking the red pill. It's the realization that men do not hold systemic privileges and power. And black pill moves that even further. It's like individual attempts to game this system of women holding power will not give a concrete result. They are empty-handed. So a change at a societal level is necessary. Black pill represents that. So yeah. So here is a language example that we can see that are used in most incel communities. So here we can see store-pilled food cell, produce core vibes, store mode. So here it's very kind of the use of the language seems very alien to outsiders, and that's on purpose. That's for keeping like an in-group identity intact. So yes, the language system. Yes, so they all have a language system with their own lexical and grammatical structures, like prefixes and suffixes that I just showed. Like we can see here the suffixes they added. And they also use borrowed terminology from other fields as well, right? And they also coin their own terms. They coin new terms. So yes, that's the incels in general and the language use in incels, the function of it. What about the Turkish incel community? So they're relatively new, I must say that. And they're estimated to be very small in numbers, but started becoming more proactive in the last 1 or 2 years. They have a forum website called trincel.com. They have a dedicated wiki page, like just promoting, actually defining the key terms of incel, etc. Like serves as like a recruiting ground for newcomers. And also they have a Twitter account, and they also have a dedicated YouTube channel. So as you can see, most of the incel community is banned from mainstream media outlets, mainstream digital media outlets. But in Turkey, they all of their platforms are still there. So they are openly posting stuff, but they're not like aggressively proactive. They are posting new stuff periodically, we can say. Yeah. And for my last part, these are directly taken from the incel forum, the Turkish incel forum. Even though they're using the Turkish language as their first language, see here, there isn't anything Turkish being used in, except for maybe the Islam pill. And that's not even totally Turkish. But yeah, they're using a very borrowed terminology. It's very inextricably linked to its foreign counterparts, so the American counterparts. So yes, that's it for my part, and I'm now giving the floor to my dear colleague, Tuğba.
Thank you, Engin. We can move on to the next slide, I think.
Yes.
Okay, so the main reason that we wanted to talk about this topic in the context of digital archives and infrastructures at this conference is because for communities like incels, which are primarily created online and which not even primarily, but almost completely socialize and come together online, the primary and in many cases only way that researchers or other public observers or commentators can interact with them is through the use of these forums or Reddit communities or other kinds of online archives. But the language use here, particularly in countries which are not primarily English speaking like Turkey, and where a lot of the jargon, as we saw in Engin's part of the presentation, has been lifted almost wholesale from the English and completely, in a way, lacks the kind of context or the kind of intuitive understanding that you can have as a native English speaker to it. For researchers who are working in Turkish or researchers who speak English as a second or third language, it creates a very unique kind of way of engaging with these digital archives and with these digital mediums. So when we talk about this kind of language and the way language is used, it's important for a number of reasons. First, there's the issue of, in this context, commercialization, which is a issue that is pretty actually like secondary in the incel context, but it's interesting because a lot of the jargon used in these communities, like talking about the way men are supposed to look or the way you're supposed to act or the things like copes, etc., have kind of been taken from other communities and have developed in this jargony way for the purposes of commercialization. So there's that level of intertextuality where you need to be able to contextualize the online activity in the context of the real life or at least commercial market activity. More importantly, this kind of specific opaque language does serve to legitimize their grievances or their ideas, because as far as it draws on sources like self-help literature or pseudoscience or pop psychology or even phrenology in certain places, it serves to present this kind of ideology as a more legitimate, well thought out, almost at times scientific idea. And using this kind of lingo that is kind of impenetrable for the outside really serves to strengthen and establish the in-group identity, and to also keep skeptical people who haven't spent enough time in these archives to really be dragged into it or drawn in by their ideology or their ideas. It serves to keep these people out of the group or to keep these people from being able to really engage with any of the ideas. And most importantly, this is a tool of socialization, because creating the same and specific language for every member of a community to use, particularly if the same language isn't really accessible or available outside of the group, really creates this both a worldview and the substrate within which the worldview is created and expressed to us. Because, as you know, a lot of different linguists and social scientists have previously argued that the way we speak or the way we think about ideas in language really changes the way we understand the world or the way we conceptualize it and how we share this with other people. And it has a very, very important role in socialization through this aspect. So being able to understand the language of the communities you're studying or the language that you're interacting with is obviously very important. We can go to the next. Okay. In the context of research, there is multiple implications of this kind of very specific and difficult to penetrate language. The first is that it creates a very high barrier of entry for a lot of researchers, because it's not just a matter of knowing enough English to understand the specific words, or even knowing enough of the, particular like morphological traits or the particular language uses of the incels, but you also need to be able to understand and kind of parse both the intertextual references that they have with other parts of the manosphere or with the older communities like the pickup artists. And it also creates a loss of that easy intuition that a lot of us have when we're working with text in our own language. So it creates this kind of setting where, while you're still working within your own country and within your own language, it's kind of akin to working in a foreign place, more like an anthropologist than anything else in the old way, the old sense of anthropology, that is. Okay. The loss of intuition, and it turns the research process into something that's not only interpretation and explanation, but something that's more akin to translation in a way, because there are multiple levels of intertextuality and multiple levels of opacity to this language use and to the kind of navigation of these archives. And it draws in a lot of skill sets in a way that mostly we don't need to use in these kind of settings. And in a broader sense, we can also see that this is an important takeaway, not specifically for the study of incels alone, but for the study of a lot of these kind of online archives, because in general, mimetic kind of forms, not just these forums or this community in particular, but memes are also extremely and deeply intertextual, and at the point where they kind of cross national boundaries, which they obviously frequently do, it also calls into the same idea of intertextuality and translation, in addition to interpretation when we're working with digital sociology or digital humanities in general. Okay, Engin. So we can go to the next slide. Okay, so there are some examples here that I quickly want to point to kind of better contextualize this. One is you can see the full translations of the tweets or the content on the left. One here is the very odd use of rape in both languages, with the Turkish being put in parentheses. Like, this is a convention that I have no idea why they do this, but there are also other examples similar to this that I've come across. And this is the kind of impenetrable reasoning or odd use of language and thing that creates the difficulties in researching these contexts, even as a native speaker of both languages. Okay, the next one. Okay. And here we can see the use of foid, which is, it's how incels refer to women in a lot of cases. It's kind of like a portmanteau of female and android, if I recall correctly. So it's a way of dehumanizing women in their speech and in their discourse, which here is further, in my opinion, a further kind of dehumanization, because it draws it even farther into becoming just this completely foreign and impenetrable word referring to this group, which is already, you know, seen as being something completely alien to the men who are involved in this forum. And in the second tweet, the mention of SJWs, for example, which is a completely imported concept into Turkish political discourse, and something that's, I personally have never heard it mentioned outside of this kind of online communities and online discourse in these like forums and stuff. And being able to parse this necessitates a certain kind of involvement and already embeddedness in these communities to be able to understand these tweets. And we can go to the next one. The rules here, these are the rules of the Incel forum, the Turkish Incel forum. We haven't translated the whole thing because it's a lot of text and it's not really necessary. The particularly interesting example here is number 4, where it says that people in the forum should not be sympathizing with or propagating, at least, the ideas like red pill, because they are adherents to the black pill, which is a more extreme version of the red pill ideology, leftism, feminism, etc. These cucked ideas, which is another term which, while you can have a pretty similar thing in Turkish, you could come up with a thing instead of translating it or trying to localize the terminology here, even though this isn't something that's even specific to incel use. And it's really moved kind of into the broader culture at this point. They keep the English, the foreign word for it. Or like in the bottom where we have siber zorbalık, which is the Turkish for bully. And then the next word is also bully, which also points to a certain kind of, if not unfamiliarity, then at least not being very parsimonious or very careful with the language use. which is also another source of difficulty for researching it because it adds a layer of trying to figure out the intentionality behind these kind of choices, which makes no sense. It's similar to calling something an ATM machine, which is a mistake that a lot of people do make, but at the same time, it points to either a fundamental misunderstanding of the concepts that they are dealing with in these archives, or to okay, we can move to the next one, yeah. And here's another example of that, where they have religion maxing, which, like, maxing anything kind of points to trying to, build yourself up in that area or use that to deal with your other issues. But you have religion max, and then you have din max, which is din is the Turkish for religion. So here you have an example of them creating their own half Turkish, half Incelish, even at this point, not even English language, but still using them simultaneously instead of really localizing the concepts. And like here we have the hypergamy of Turkish girls, which is a username, and this kind of the internalization of these ideas is very clear in general in these forums, but at the same time, the hypergamy of Turkish women is not actually, obviously, it's not really well established in any context, but having it internalized to this extent also points to the way that we can use these archives, the usernames, not even just the content, but the usernames or the other surrounding aspects, to understand how these communities function through this kind of digital work. And I think that's the final slide, right? Okay, so thank you very much, and yes, thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Now, questions are open for Engin and Tuğba. So if you have any questions, please use raise your hand feature or type your question in the chat. I actually have one question for Engin. Because you mentioned that the Turkish incel wasn't active until the recent years. I wonder if you could explain a little bit about what the factors that affected this group to be very active online in the recent 1 or 2 years.
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. That was what we are curious about when we started looking into this as well. Yeah, I mean, we can just speculate at this point, I guess. I mean, the rise of the Turkish incel community coincides with the ongoing pandemic, I guess. The digital activities increased substantially during the process, especially after 2020. In 2021, the online activities of the Turkish incel community just reached a peak, because we can see the public platforms like YouTube channel, the Twitter account, all of them was created in 2021, basically. So yeah, the ongoing pandemic had a huge role in that, I guess. I'm not sure, Tuğba, if you want to jump in.
This is actually kind of another point where it's difficult to work with these kind of archives, because I wanted to study Turkish incels back in like 2017, 2018, where they were fairly active on Reddit. Still like a small group, but they just at that time had newly started a Turkish incel subreddit, and that's where most of this incel things used to happen back before Reddit whole-scale banned all of their subreddits and deleted all of the archives, although you can find some archived versions of them online still. But because in a more broader context, irregardless of where it's located, the community, kind of trying to track these different online communities throughout the different platforms they use, like from the forums to Reddit to other platforms now that Reddit is banning them, and from there to some IRL groups, etc., creates a kind of difficulty of really establishing a timeline or establishing their developments. But in particular, like non-English speaking or non-Western context, we can also talk of a difference in platform use, because Reddit, like I said, was a big place for them, both in Turkey and internationally. But Reddit in general isn't nearly as popular in Turkey as it is in the US or in the UK, where the English-speaking communities, the first communities of the incels really grew. So it also creates a kind of blind spot where you wouldn't know that this kind of thing is even happening if you aren't already on Reddit or already interested in the English-speaking counterparts of these movements, unless there's some big event that causes them to kind of come into the public eye. They can really fly under the radar without being noticed.
Thank you so much.